welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Cinema Crusaders. I'm your host, Nim, and it's Bracy, and welcome back to the one, the only Cinema Crusaders here on Friday afternoon. That's right, it's not a death battle. It's Cinema Crusaders, where we talk about pre-production, post-production, special effects, the cast, and all sorts of things for retro movies, which we feel deserve to be looked at again. But before we get into the movie we're going to do this week, I want to introduce you to my co-host, the Bracy to my Nim, the boomstick to my whiz, per se. I'm talking about none other than Jeff Bracy. How you doing, Jeff?
Renew, carousel, renew.
Yeah.
I'm good. How about you, man?
You ever see anybody renew?
Not personally.
Yeah.
I don't think anything shady, though.
Francis was lying his ass off in that one scene, too. He was like, yeah, I saw somebody renew. You didn't see anybody renew, Francis. Not Peter Francis.
He bought into it hardcore. He was a true believer.
Yeah, he did. Robert Jordan, though, great actor. I'm sure we'll talk about him a little bit once we get to him. So, as we have already alluded to, we are talking this week about the 1976 movie Logan's Run, which is based off of a book by William F. Nolan and George Clayton Johnson, similarly called Logan's Run, from 1967. And I will say right off the bat, both the book and the movie are very much a product of their time. Yeah. They are 60s/70s films. The film definitely has that 70s aesthetic to it. I mean, I don't know. We'll get into it when we talk about
you gotta, when you look at this
design
film,
and everything else.
Yeah, when you look at this film, you gotta keep in mind, like, this is just before Star Wars hit. So there's, this has that retro future look that you get from Star Trek, from 2001, from Planet of the Apes, so many films like that. It's before Absolutely. George Lucas went and blew all our minds and all our concepts of how a sci-fi show should be.
Not only that, at this time, science fiction, do you think it, I'm going to put this out there. You tell me if this is fair to say.
Okay.
The 50s science fiction was, we talked about Forbidden Planet last time, and it had a theme, but this science fiction went kind of, I'm not going to say silly, but it went over the top. Everything was about entertainment, and, and there were themes behind it, but mostly it was, a lot of it was horror movies or The Thing That Came from Outer Space, or, those types of films. And then the 60s and 70s came along, and all of these movies bordered on taking themselves too seriously, but everything had a theme to it. You had Andromeda Strain, you had A Clockwork Orange, you had Stanley Kubrick's film.
That was Clockwork Orange.
Also the
2001.
Everything was very serious, very taking itself very seriously science fiction. It's like, we're here to warn you about the future type stuff.
I kind of look at it this way. You see two things in science fiction in these periods. And I guess some of that's relevant today because you see sort of the cultural moray at the time. So in the 50s, you see a lot of, like, gung-ho, rah-rah America, it is very present when we watch Forbidden Planet. Leslie Nielsen is the pre-Kirk. Captain Kirk is the space cowboy. He is definitely the hero. We are the good guys, and we've got to go out and kind of solve a problem. The flip side of that, of course, is movies like, The Thing from Another World, or, It, the movie that inspired Alien in a lot of ways, Earth versus the Flying Saucers, where there's, of course, the one with Gort, which is that sort of that cynical view of ourselves and what we're capable of, and reminding us to always be humble. When you're going off to be the good guy, you don't want to start having that sort of manifest destiny idea, because that's when you start having a lot of trouble, when you want to, like, not just colonize, but say, like, oppress people, because, like, well, we're a little bit better than you, so this is ours now. And so I think those things were trying to remind us of that. I think we kind of shift into another period, though, where we start to get even more introspective. And I think, like, right here in the 60s and 70s is part of that.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think a lot of these movies, there's this era, and there were, don't get me wrong, there were movies mixed in there that were just pure
schlock.
like Barbarella. There is no
No.
overriding theme to Barbarella. It's just
One of my favorite kind of kooky sci-fis from the 50s was one where like these big-headed Martians had alcohol needles in their fingers and they juiced you with alcohol. And it's like all the bodies there. Oh man, the dude just drank too much. I thought that was like a silly idea, but it's also kind of brilliant at the same time because that was the period when like the reefer madness and the drugs were starting to become prevalent in the popular consciousness. And so that movie was a real warning right there.
Yeah, I think that this era though, this 60s to most of the 70s, all of the movies were very much about social consciousness or examining social ills and things like that. I mean, dramas were like that. You had Chinatown and you had any number of different movies. I mean, all of the movies were doing this, and science fiction was no was no different.
Yeah. Now, this movie, in fact, differs significantly in a number of ways from the book series. And it's not just one book. There's a series of books, but the movie is based on the first book. And when it began production, it went through so many rewrites because one of the things they wanted to do is they wanted to push social issues into it as well, try and make it relevant for the time. And so that led to different story beats and different plot points.
And I think they had to be honest with you, because you look at other science fiction movies, contemporary science fiction movies, two spring to mind immediately. I mean, besides 2001, Future World and Westworld, both of those movies were about, Future World might as well have been, look at, Watergate happened. Now we're going to, take this and put Watergate
very much a tie-in.
Yeah. So, so we definitely had that. And like you said, then Lucas comes along and says, screw all that. I'm going back to the serials that I loved. I'm going to blow it all up, so, and then we had this great explosion of a different kind of science fiction because we had George Lucas come in. We had Ridley Scott come in, so we had all these people come in and start doing different types of things. But and even stuff that took itself seriously, like Blade Runner, was more of a detective noir story than more of a social ills story.
And shockingly, in the midst of that, we even had a return to camp with the Flash Gordon film in the 80s.
Absolutely. Another movie I love. I'd love to cover that movie. Did we cover that movie?
We haven't covered that movie. I'd be all about covering that film.
Doing a little Ming the Magnificent. We're gonna dress up in our Ming the Magnificent cosplay for that one. So,
is your men taking the right pills?
Well, and then what's his name? The great Shakespearean actor. He was actually in Henry V with Kenneth Branagh and a couple other Shakespeare movies. Plays the leader of the Hawk people, whatever they were named.
That's Brian Blessed.
Is that who that is?
Yeah, a lot of great actors in that. We got Timothy Dalton. We got Brian Blessed. We've got Max von Sydow. It's just littered with top-notch actors.
Yeah, which is incredible. Plus, Queen sang the soundtrack, so you can't go wrong, man. But enough about that movie. Let's get to Logan's Run. So, just to
speaking
break
of music,
down,
Jerry Goldsmith's amazing score for the film.
Absolutely. Let's break this down. Plot-wise, I'm going to cover the movie, and I want you, if you can, to tell us the differences between the movie and the book. So, real quick, the movie,
I got my notes ready,
covers a society where you get to live till you're 30. And basically, you are clear. You have this crystal embedded in your hand, and here I think they call it your death clock.
That's your life clock.
Life clock.
Death clock is a metal band.
Yes,
it's brutal, man. It's totally brutal.
Yeah. Your life clock, and you're clear for a certain point, and then it turns a color. I think you turn green, and it's measured in decades. So, like green 6 means you're basically 16, I think, or you turn green at 16. So,
yeah, I don't have the notes on how that works, but I do have it as far as the book goes, and they also are color coded. And so, for instance, in the book, the crystal starts at yellow, and that's ages 0 through 6. Then blue 7 through 13, and then red 14 through 20, because in the book 21 is your cutoff. Now, a lot of the cast, only Ginny Agater and Farrah Fawcett were under 30 when they shot the film. As a matter of fact, Francis is like 42 in real life.
Yeah.
And so with Michael York just being 33 at the time, they decide to let's bump the age up to 30 because
Mhm.
it's going to be harder to corral a bunch of really good actors who are very young. Was
Can,
the
can,
thinking?
can I ask you a question real quick though?
Sure.
This has occurred to me as we watch these older movies all the time, and we watch these people, and even when they're young, So for instance, Jessica 6 is supposed to be 16 in the movie,
Yeah.
and she was probably in her 20s. But
She was 23 at the time.
okay, I have noticed that compared to today, people back in the day who were of a certain age, so let's say that people who are our age back then look much older to me than people who are our age now, and vice versa, for any age. It doesn't matter what it is. So
I think we probably have better makeup and better lighting, and nowadays you can digitally touch somebody up. So
okay, okay. Yeah, it's just weird. It's like to me,
now I've had a couple of friends who are actors over the years, and one thing they all say is I had somebody who's in their 20s and they got dolled up to look like a teenager and they couldn't believe it when they were on camera because they said something about the camera does make you look younger than you actually are.
really.
And
And,
maybe it's the quality of film they had at the time, which is not like our 4K, which shows every line, every crease, every wrinkle and pimple. But
mhm.
back then, if you look at your old VHS tapes, things are always a little bit softer, so it's more forgiving.
I do have to say, I think part of the problem too is especially when we're writing parts for teenagers, or for a character supposed to be teenager stuff. We as a society have moved past wanting to cast teenagers in films, especially if they're playing parts that we're not comfortable having
Yeah,
kids do that actual stuff.
yeah,
So
it's not like the film Kids, which is very gratuitous and the sort of abusive lives of teenagers having sex and drugs and doing criminal activity and things like that. And that film disturbed a lot of people because they did use actual young people for those roles.
yeah, I mean, I'll be honest with you. As a parent, I even watch movies like I don't know, just to pick one out of thin air. Billy Madison. Love Billy Madison movie. But when you got a bunch of 5 and 6 year olds saying curse words, I'm like, where are their parents? It's like, where are their parents letting them do this stuff? So uh
I kind of got to look at that as a bunch of acting. The parents got to carefully pick what their kids doing, and I guess you have to do like like when you're raising your kids, like, oh no, these are adult words, and you can only say them for this because it's a job for you.
yeah.
So I do tend to let some of that slide, but there are times when like you have like a pet cemetery where that little kid is running around with a scalpel. It's like, did that kid get messed up for life? I kind of wonder
Well,
sometimes.
as a Michael York tangent, Michael York, who played Tybalt in the 1960s Romeo and Juliet,
Mm.
we just found out that the two leads in that, the two people who played Romeo and Juliet, were both underage filming nude sex scenes,
Mm.
and that's become a thing now. So that was the 60s. That wouldn't fly now. So and nor should it, in my opinion.
Nor
That's
should it.
just my opinion. Yeah.
I mean,
But
like
anyway,
Brooke Shields famously used body doubles for like the Blue Lagoon, and yet creepily, in Pretty Baby, she was an underage girl shown full frontally naked, starring in a film
wow,
with Susan Sarandon.
that's crazy.
Yeah, and like her mother's excuse for that is like, well, she's not developed, she's not really an object. It's like, let me explain to you what pedophiles are, my dear.
Well, like when I interviewed Cassandra Peterson, come to find out that her parents signed a waiver so she could work as a topless showgirl in Vegas at 17. So crazy stuff.
That makes the Elvira movie make a lot more sense now.
Yes, it does. So back to Logan's Run though. So we talked a little bit about the life clock, and I think it was called like a something flower in the book, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's like they call it a palm flower, I believe. Here it is. Yeah, palm flower,
Yeah.
palm flower crystal.
But in both the book and the movie, basically the society is Malthusian. And for all of you that don't know what Malthusian is a philosophy that holds that the Earth's resources are limited and that population grows exponentially, and that eventually you're going to have to cull the population, otherwise we're all going to die.
Well,
And
that's definitely more a thing of the movie. In the book, what happened is the young people got tired of all the old people waging wars. the young people rose up against the society. When you hear people complaining today, it's like, oh, we're all just led by a bunch of rich white men, really are rich old men.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, the young people have this revolution, and they decree that it's the fault of old people. Everything bad that happens is the fault of old people. And the person who led the revolution, as a matter of fact, in the book, he went ahead and had himself put down very shortly after the revolution. He completed the revolution, and he set the first example. 21 is the cutoff, and I will show you how I will lead the way. And he got
So
axed.
it's kind of like a science fiction dystopian Lord of the Flies, then.
In a lot of ways, because the lifestyle they lead is incredibly hedonistic, and you do see that in the film. And I'm grateful they put that in the film. Like whenever you see like vapors, these colored vapors they have, those are drugs. As a matter of fact, they even execute you. They don't have the carousel. That's an invention of the film. You
Mm-hmm.
go to what's called a sleep shop, and you're put to death via like lethal injection. But it's lethal injection that's like the best ecstasy trip you ever had in your life.
Well, I would imagine if you've got to live an entire life by the age of 21 and then get so much into it and not be, constantly in a state of existential dread, knowing that your death is coming, you'd probably have to be
Yeah,
hedonistic and drugged
yeah.
up and everything else.
Their
So,
lifestyle is so completely hedonistic. They, like Francis, never think about it.
yeah. Yeah, it makes perfect sense. I mean, and even in the movie, you do see some of that,
Hmm.
Like I said, though, they did hit on these Malthusian themes, which are a
Yeah,
thing today. I mean, if you care to look it up, I
yeah.
don't want to get into it. That's a
Yeah,
really
the
deep
movie, like you
conversation.
said, the movie's definitely got that. And Francis espouses this in his scene where he's in the jacuzzi. And he's like, one for one, one dies and one's born. It's a perfect closed system. It makes you think of movies um, like what's that one with Chris Evans, The Ice Train,
Yeah.
where they have the enclosed system they were talking about.
Soylent Green.
No, Snowpiercer.
Oh, it makes me
Which,
think of Soylent Green as well.
yeah, limited resources. What are you going to do? Well, you got to limit how many people you got.
And it's interesting. There are a number of movies that have copied this. Most notably, I could think of one fairly recently, the In Time movie with what's his name? The singer
Oh,
from
Justin
NSYNC.
Timberlake.
Yeah, Justin Timberlake.
Yeah,
Which
yeah.
that's not a bad movie, actually.
No, it's not.
It's worth checking out. Uh,
I
so
thought that was interesting. Like time as a currency.
yeah,
Crazy
but
idea. Selling off pieces of your life.
at the same time, it's that same idea that you get a certain amount of time. It's just in that one they really tried to make it classist, which is you could
Mhm.
live past your allotted time by accruing time as a currency and things like that, which is an interesting twist on the whole idea.
But
Uh,
here, the brilliance of this is we don't have that because you think if people were in charge, you would get that. But the brilliance here is everything is run by a central computer, which is completely objective in everything it does.
One of the things I think is so interesting about the movie, and I want to hear your thoughts about this, is that I think that it very much highlights the insidious nature and danger behind so-called utopian systems.
Mm. Yeah. The idea of utopia is great. And I'll just say, as a Christian, like, I think the only utopia is going to happen is when Jesus comes back.
Yeah.
But that aside, looking at it in terms of fiction, we see that like one of my favorite examples of a utopia that seemingly works is the one Gene Roddenberry put together in Star Trek. Now, Earth has become this utopia where there's no property and there's no money, and everybody just does things because they're good at things and they want to be better at things. They want to better themselves. But
Hmm.
as soon as we leave our little backwater planet, we run into people who aren't like that at all. The Ferengi are complete capitalists. The Klingons are warlike. The Vulcans are controlling, and the Romulans are devious. So, you can't bring utopia to the whole galaxy, just like we'll never have utopia to the whole world. Something will always break down because there's always going to be somebody who wants more.
Well, not only that, I would say with Star Trek, and I'm sure, believe me, I love Star Trek, and there's
Hmm.
probably a lot of Trekkies will be mad at me for saying this, but I think it's only works because we don't bother to look too closely at
Yeah,
the Federation and see what's really going on, because there have got to be people who are not getting everything they want or need.
there would be no Section 31 if everything was perfect, was there?
Yeah. So, and to be fair, I don't think we as Trekkies really want to see that. That's
No.
one of the complaints that we've had in the past with Picard and things like that is like we don't we want our utopian Star Trek. We just want it to be an ideal and watch it and enjoy it for what it
And
is. So,
that's the great thing about having this fantasy and fiction. In that sense, utopia is achievable, and it's something we can look towards. It's something we can aim for. It's something we can aspire to. You
mhm.
just realize that we live in a world that is bound by realistic laws of physics and dynamics and people are going to people. Somebody is always going to want what their neighbor has. Somebody is always going to be like, oh, I can squeeze a little bit more juice out of this. Somebody's always going to do that, and you're never going to get rid of all those people. The only way to get rid of all those people is to genocide them,
Yeah.
and that's not the way to go either.
Yeah. So back to Logan's Run, though. So we've got this whole system set up, and Jeff alluded to the fact that instead of the sleep shops, they have this thing called carousel, and there's this idea that you go up there and that once it's your time to die, you can go up there and go through this ritual, and there's a possibility that you will be renewed. In other words, you'll be allowed to live past your time to 31, and if you're not, then you get basically incinerated. And everyone's like, oh no, some people have gotten renewed. Well, no one's ever seen anybody gotten renewed. It's a big myth,
Yeah.
that they've done.
It's sort of in a more positive way, if you will. It reminded me a lot of 1984, where they had like the 5 minutes of rage, where they shuffled them all into the theater, and they got all their anger and angst out by shouting at their supposed enemy, and this allowed the people to become docile once again. So this is like kind of a little extra spice to their life of sex and drugs. I think maybe the computer decided that, and this is me trying to interpret what was going on, that that we need a little bit of violence in our lives as human beings. We can't exist without it. There's a primal need in us for violence, just like how in the Matrix, we couldn't have a perfect utopia. It didn't work. The first Matrix didn't work, so you had to have a Matrix that introduced conflict into the system. That's the only way we kind of exist. So this Roman Colosseum spectacle, where people are lifted up into the air via this kind of like gravity field, and then they get incinerated as they get to a certain height. And it's colorful, it's exciting. They look very Cirque du Soleil. They've got the wonderful red and the flame spandex, and they explode up in the air, and people are shouting at them, renew, renew. And it's so cult like and so exciting at the same time.
I always thought that was interesting, because to me, the way I look at their costumes with the flames is that it is supposed to symbolize a phoenix.
Okay.
So yeah,
because
so
the mask is clearly death, but below that, because the fire does come up, is the possibility of rebirth. Ah, man, that's nice. That's a nice catch.
yeah. One of the things that I think is interesting too is that, and I think this is something I like better than the book. The idea of the book is this idea of giving them carousel, because if you've got to report to the sleep shop and you're going to get killed, versus carousel, it's always that thing. It's if people have hope that they will live past 30, then they'll cling to the delusion that the system is real, that there is a possibility, and so they won't rise up against it, because I got to figure there will be a discontent growing if everybody just keeps getting killed at 21, even if you're drugged out and everything. So
what's interesting about the book is because the age limit is younger, people do have jobs. The only people we see in the movie have jobs are the cleanup crew, the plastic surgeon, and the Sandman, of course. Everybody else just seems to be having a really happy time. And in the book, people do have jobs. There's this section where like Logan is like looking at this beautiful sculpture, kind of like where the hand is in the movie. And the sculpture is incomplete, and he's like using these fire crystals and like, oh, this great big beautiful thing, and it's incomplete because he couldn't complete his last work of art before his day came up, and that'll never be finished. He talks about how like he was trained by a martial artist who was like 18. There are all these people in all these jobs, so people in his society have jobs, but they are also incredibly hedonistic, so they're doing the things they're good at. So they do have more of a life in the book, if you will.
Right.
But it's like, and you talk about uncomfortable. It's like creepy and weird because like, he like gets hit on by a 13-year-old and tells him like, I am more experienced than any other woman you'll find, because that's their culture. You know, you only live to 21, so you live as much as you can before then. And yeah, it's creepy and weird and dystopic, but of course they don't realize it because they're living it.
Yeah. So, long story short, so Logan is what in he's called a Sandman, and I think they're called Sandman in the
They
book
are.
as well. And both Logan and Francis are Sandman, but Francis' character is substantially different, and we're going to get into that a
Yeah.
little bit in just a little bit. But Sandman are basically, for all intents and purposes, they're Blade Runners from Blade
Yeah.
Runner. Their job is to retire people once they've gone past their expiration date if they don't submit to the official means of execution. So they go and they chase people, and that's where Logan's Run comes in, because the people who don't want to submit, they run. They're runners, and eventually Logan is going to run. And in the movie, Logan runs because the computer that's running this whole society has heard about something called Sanctuary, where people who run have disappeared. And according to the computer, there's some number. I think it's 1,586. I think.
It's like 1,053, I think.
Okay. Unaccounted for runners. So people that have disappeared and the computer can't account for them. And this is important because Shadewing, who couldn't be here, had a question about the ending. And I think I got a little explanation for him, but we'll get to that.
Yeah, his feeling was that the ending appears to be a little all over the place, a little rushed. And
Yeah.
again, I think that has to do with the conflict in the rewrites that happened.
Yeah.
Because
I think
the ending of the book is way different.
I think there are some things that make sense and some things that I would agree with you guys on, but we'll get there. So these unaccounted for runners, this computer is trying to figure out, it's heard about Sanctuary and it wants to send Logan there. So basically, it speeds Logan's clock up and turns him flashing so that he's got to run, and tells him he's supposed to pose as a runner and go undercover to find Sanctuary. And so that's where the whole plot of the movie comes in, and we're going to see these various things happen where it's an unfolding mystery and chase movie, and eventually they're going to get to the outside to Washington D.C. But Sanctuary is never going to be found, and that's going to play into it in a little bit. But before we get into that, I want to hear about what Logan's Run is all about in the book.
Okay. Well, in the book, I don't precisely remember if he was put on a mission to find Sanctuary, but that seems to fit. Because the Sandmen, of course, are trying to clean up the runners. One of the interesting differences here is, like, the Sandmen in this movie, I always thought had a really cool gun. I love how the muzzle flash flared out like that. And the guns seemed to fire off these explosive charges because you see them.
You want to hear an interesting tidbit on that?
Yeah.
Well, in the book, Logan just decides to run. He turns 21 and says, screw
okay,
it.
So it is on his life day. He decides he's had enough. But
and he takes off.
He does try and infiltrate Sanctuary on his own then.
Yeah, but the gun really is...
I was going to get to that.
The prequel, what it is? Okay, go for it.
The difference between the two guns, like I said, in the movie, we see the gun has these explosive charges because we see it not only just burn holes through people, but it also explodes concrete and blows things apart. But in the movie, in the book, they just call it the gun. And so it actually looks a lot like a revolver, but it has selectable ammo. It's got a net, it's got drug needles, and the deadliest round is called the Homer, which will seek in on your body heat, like the Gene Simmons, Tom Selleck movie, Runner. Not Runner. Was it Runner? Maybe not. Anyway, there's a Tom Selleck, Runaway, because it's all about runaway robots. But Gene Simmons had developed a technology that fired a guided missile bullet that would track people down by their body heat. And Logan's Run has these things, and everybody's terrified of those because they will chase your butt down. And so that made I kind of wish they'd done something like that. That would have probably been pretty hard to do back then, but like the gun was a pretty cool thing.
You know what else that the gun in Logan's Run, the book, does?
Self-destruct.
If someone picks it up that's not coded for it.
What
does that sound like? What is a gun?
That sounds like Judge Dredd to me.
Yes, it does, doesn't it? It sounds like
they had the old select fire on there, and
yeah. And if you pick it up and you're not authorized to use it, it blows
And
up.
there's another thing. Judge Dredd has the wastes. They have these walled dome cities, so somebody was clearly inspired. And did have a
Absolutely.
lot of British actors in it, so UK magazines looking at this film, like,
Yeah, exactly. So no, I'm sorry. So we digressed. So yeah, keep going with Logan and what he goes through. So
Yeah, so Logan tries to find sanctuary, and unlike this film, there's a very different idea of what sanctuary is and is not between the book and the film. And I think Logan's perspective was that if he found sanctuary and was able to turn it in, because he spends a lot of the time in the book being an anti-hero before he
mhm.
turns the corner, that maybe he could buy himself some time. But by the end, he realizes sanctuary is the only way for him, and he fully comes around to being a runner and seeking life with his wife or his wife to be, and finding out where sanctuary is, and it really is kind of the safest place possible in this particular world.
Yeah,
For the book's sake, sanctuary is actually a real place. It's a colony on Mars, and they actually escape the Earth in a rocket ship and fly onto the colony because, like, Earth is as far as they're concerned, Earth is a done deal
see,
because the computer that's running the world, that's I believe it's in the Cherokee Mountains, the main computer bank
Crazy Horse.
is
Yep.
yeah, Crazy Horse. Thank you. It's starting to malfunction and go a little loopy. And interesting point of fact, the game, the RPG Paranoia, is based off of Logan's Run, where they have a crazy
Really
computer running the system. And the idea was like a Logan 4, Logan 5, Logan 6. You're all actually supposed to be clones. They don't really do that in the movies so much. You kind of get that, but then like, seed mother, but you're all kind of like pod people at the same time. So that's where the idea of this came from. Because in Paranoia, every time your character gets killed, a new clone pops out.
interesting. So yeah, so you already alluded that Logan eventually does go to Sanctuary. He gets off planet and goes to the colony on Mars. In the movie, they get to DC and they find a character there who's simply called the Old Man, and he's played by Peter Ustinov. And and then eventually they're going to make a decision. This is going to get into the end of the film, but I kind of want to break from the plot here because there's a whole cast now that we've mentioned. All of the principal players have been introduced within the plot. So I kind of want to talk about them and then a little bit about the look of the film. And then I want to hit the end of the film right at the end of the podcast. So for you, so I would say the principal actors in this movie, obviously Michael York as
Logan,
Logan. Then there's Peter Ustinov
the
as
Old Man.
the Old Man. Richard Jordan as Francis Seven. Ginny Gutter as Jessica Six, and I think I saw her in a few other things as well.
American Werewolf in London.
Okay. The voice of the
The
box.
box. Sorry, board.
Yeah, Roscoe Lee Brown, and you may not recognize that name, but if you see him, you would recognize him. He is a really accomplished actor who's been in a whole host of things, and unfortunately, his robot costume is kind of hokey, especially around the face and lips and everything. But that's a whole other thing. Then there is a very, very young Farrah Fawcett Majors as Holly 13. This is
Now,
pre
funny
Charlie's
thing about
Angels.
this is she got cast because Michael York saw her at a tennis court and thought she was hot.
Really?
And she got this role before she landed Charlie's Angels.
Huh.
So they kind of like, hey, she's hot and she's blind. We'll just make her the bimbo in the film.
And then there were a couple of one in particular, the guy who plays the doc, who plays the plastic surgeon, Michael Anderson.
Yeah.
He was a very accomplished professional actor in movies. Actually, going back to westerns again, it's this weird theme of Western actors who popped up in all these westerns over the years as professional actors.
Well, what's kind of funny is this movie got stalled because there was a bit of a lull between things like Planet of the Apes in 2001. And the studio started to lose faith that science fiction was the way to go anymore. And it was Westworld that helped get this project going again. The studio's like, oh, sci-fi is still in. Okay.
So let's talk about, so that was some great stuff about Farrah Fawcett, and I mentioned Roscoe Lee Brown. But let's go through the four, I think, main characters, and I kind of want to hear your thoughts on them. So first of all is the wonderful Peter Ustinov. Probably for most of us as kids, we most knew Peter Ustinov as the voice of from Robin Hood, King John, the lion in the Robin Hood films, cartoon from Disney and stuff like that. But Peter Ustinov,
I'll go further back. I remember him as the narrator of the Bible movie way back in the day.
Ooh, yeah, very good. Very good. Yeah, and I mean, and this guy is just, when you think of consummate British actor, writer, filmmaker, I mean, he's right up there with the greats, David Niven.
Wasn't he also a Hercule Poirot for a number of films?
Yes, he was. Yes, he was. The old Agatha Christie films, he played Hercule Poirot. In fact, he played it in the 70s. So, I have watched Death on the Nile and Murder on the Orient Express with him, and very good. So, very, very good. So,
because I believe Michael York was also in that film as well.
I also remember him from he played Nero in a obscure movie from 1951 called was it Quo Vadis or something like that?
I'll have to check that out.
But he was good in it. He was really good. But he was in a lot of movies with David Niven as well. But he's an amazing actor. I think he was also in, I don't know, he's been in so much. Wasn't he in Spartacus? And didn't he play? Oh man, there's so many stuff that he's done. I can't even begin to name it. So
yeah.
But then Michael York. Now this guy, I don't think he gets the credit among cinemaphiles that he should. Modern cinemaphiles, because he kind of disappeared. I think the last thing I remember seeing him in was playing Basil Exposition and the
Austin Powers films.
Yeah. But this guy was the consummate actors in the 60s and 70s,
Yeah, big fan of his stuff. I think Logan's Run is probably the first movie I saw him in. And no surprise, as a cool sci-fi movie, and he was an up-and-comer at the time.
See, I always thought of him as a Shakespearean actor. I had seen him in Logan's Run, but I was a huge Shakespeare lover as a kid, and so watched all those movies. And I remember he was in Taming of the Shrew. He was in Romeo and Juliet. I think was in a couple others.
If I remember correctly, he did a really nice turn in a version of The Isle of Dr. Moreau.
Did he? I'd have to look at
that. In this particular version, the Doctor attempts to turn him into one of his animal men, and he has to fight the animalistic urges. He's trying to devolve him, whereas he's trying to evolve the animals.
I will say, and I just realized this looking at his filmography, my favorite role with him in it has to be one of my favorite movies as a kid, because I love sword fighting. The Three Musketeers. He played D'Artagnan.
Yes. Oh my goodness. How can I forget that? That is like the Michael York movie. Okay, yes. I take it back. That's probably the first thing I saw him in.
He was outstanding.
Man. D'Artagnan all the way.
Who played Milady in that movie? Was that that had oh, now I gotta look. Hold on for a minute.
Jessica Lange?
Michael York is D'Artagnan. Oliver Reed is Athos, and I think Milady was Faye Dunaway.
Faye Dunaway.
Wow. Okay. Charlton Heston is Cardinal Richelieu.
Absolutely brilliant series of films. It's shot as one film, but they broke it up into two.
Yeah, absolutely great. I mean, and I love the Errol Flynn. I think Errol Flynn played that as well, but those movies were outstanding.
Yeah.
And they had just the right level of bodiness and debauchery for that period of France, and they could do it because it was made in the was it the 60s or 70s, early 70s. So anyway, I digress. Then we've got I'll get to Richard Jordan last. Ginnia Gutter, who played Jessica Six, and she's very good in this movie. It's unfortunate that she's got her butt hanging out half the time.
It's kind of funny about that, like the sex robe that you first see her in, like when she puts herself in the system for the future Tinder, if you will.
Right.
She absolutely hated that costume because, like, she was just draped and she was naked,
Yeah.
and she could not wait for those scenes to be over. And like the later scenes are a little bit better, but she's still like nude up top. She's just got like this little flimsy garment, but at least she
Yeah.
has some shorts on, with under a little skirt the rest of the film.
And believe me when I tell you, folks, that the first thing that we see her in leaves absolutely nothing to the imagination. It's like if there had been the slightest gust of wind, we would have all known
Yeah,
exactly what.
if she'd have stepped over the Marilyn Monroe grate, we would know.
Yes,
But
yes,
then again,
exactly.
you do get a pretty decent little glimpse in the ice cavern.
Now, did you know? I'm curious who she played in these movies. I'm seeing in her filmography that she was in The Avengers and Captain America: Winter Soldier.
I cannot say. I don't recall. Shame on
Huh.
me.
Yeah, I'm curious who she is. I'll have to look that up later. In those movies, that's interesting. But yeah, she's another one of these actresses who's incredibly accomplished. She
Yeah.
is your actress, and she's done all sorts of different things. She's done serious drama. She's done science fiction. She's done horror with American Werewolf in London, and she
Mhm.
was also in Child's Play 2. So, um, so she's done pretty much everything. Very, very accomplished actor or actress. And then last but not least, I want to get to one of my favorite character actors. I mean, I think this guy is fantastic. Uh, Robert Jordan or Richard Jordan, as he's otherwise known.
Yeah.
Just an incredibly talented actor. Gone way too soon. He died at the very tender age of 56. Yeah, 56.
That's a shame.
Yeah, he died in 1993. This guy, just incredibly good. And I remember him seeing, I think the first time I ever saw him, other than Logan's Run, is he plays, uh, I want to say the Secretary of State in The Hunt for Red October.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah, he was really good in that. And Alec Baldwin was really good in that as well. I think Alec Baldwin is the definitive um, John Ryan, but that's just my opinion.
Jack Ryan.
Jack Ryan. Yeah, no offense to Harrison Ford, but I never really bought him as Jack Ryan. So, but what do you think of Richard Jordan or in this movie?
I really because like what makes Francis interesting is how he plays off of Logan.
Mm-hmm.
They are buddy buddy. When you first meet Logan, he's at the baby banks, and he's looking at his next replacement, Logan 6, and he's like, that's him, that's him. Like, oh man, what are you being? Francis is like, what are you being weird? Why do you care? Who your child is, or do you even know who your child came from? I was like, no, that's crazy, man. But we see that Logan is different. This is why Logan can become a runner
Mm-hmm.
because he is a little bit different than the rest of society. He is inquisitive. He does ask questions. When we get to his computer interface, I feel like that if the computer had chosen Francis, Francis wouldn't have asked whether I get my 4 years back. He wouldn't have asked any questions. He'd have just gone and done.
Yeah,
Because
absolutely.
Francis is a fanatic. He is completely dialed into the system. He is a devotee. This is his life and his religion. And on top of that, one thing you see when they hunt some runners in a scene that got excised from the film is like you actually see Francis hunt a runner on his own that
Mm-hmm.
didn't make it into the theatrical. And when he offs runner, there's like all this applause. While for the runners, you are the Grim Reaper. For a lot of people, the Sandmen are celebrities. They're the Michael Jordans. They're these. They're the Brad Pitts. They're the Jessica says like you could have any woman in the city you want. That's how popular you are.
Yeah.
And Francis lives that to the T. And as we can see, when they hunt in conjunction, they also really enjoy their job because they could have taken out the runner at any time, but they enjoyed the cruelty of
Yeah.
making the runner run. They enjoyed the hunt. And again, I think this goes back to the computer realizing segments of society need violence. They need to satisfy that primal urge, and they probably have some sort of algorithm that picks out the best people genetically or emotionally to do a job like a Sandman.
I also think that Richard Jordan brought the right demeanor and
Yeah,
fervor to the role. And later on, when he's starting to lose it, he's able to bring that insanity into his
You know
eyes.
what it you know what it reminded me of? Have you ever seen the movie Repo Man?
Yes.
His betrayal, his feeling of betrayal reminds me very much of Forrest Whitaker in that film versus Jude Law, because they've been these longtime partners in murder, legal murder. And when the partner goes off the beaten trail, the other guy can't accept it. He can't understand what's going on. It's like, we've done this together for years, man. What's wrong with you? You literally are like my brother. And
Hmm.
now it's, for him, like, he might as well have joined the Klan or something. It doesn't make any sense to him at all.
Now, real quick before we get into a little bit of production, and then we'll get to the ending of the film, and then we'll talk a little bit about that. Some other notable movies for me that he has been in, Jordan has been in. He played Duncan Idaho in Dune,
Oh
1984.
yes.
He also played Howard Prescott in The Secret of My Success from 1987. A great Michael. Go. What? Why am I? I am just blanking on the guy's name. The guy from Family Matters or Family Ties. Um,
Oh, Michael Grossman.
no, the guy that played not Michael P. Keaton, the actor who played Michael
Oh,
P.
Alex
Keaton.
speaking. Michael.
Michael. Yeah,
Michael. Come on, Back to the Future. Jeez,
we're getting old, man.
he's
All right,
only incredibly famous.
yeah.
Forgive us, Michael.
And then also this one, I would love to cover this movie sometime. The movie was released after he died, but his performance in this made for TV movie is fantastic. He played Brigadier General Louis Armistead in the movie Gettysburg for TNT
Ah,
or
very
TBS,
nice.
one of the two. Yeah, very, very. He is amazing in that film. I mean, that whole cast was amazing. Jeffrey Hurt is amazing. The whole thing is incredible, and I would love to cover that movie sometime. So let's talk a little bit about the look of the film. What are your thoughts on? Let's go costumes first, because the costumes are very 70. So do you think that the costumes fit the film and what we're trying to portray here? So
I think not only do the costumes, Michael J. Fox, I had to look it up. It was going to drive me crazy.
yes.
Um, not only do the costumes fit the film, but they fit the world,
Mhm.
and that's something that's very important. Uh, it's not explicitly stated in the movie, but you do get the idea that the different colors people wear represent their different ages. Now, you only get that via the subtext or a couple lines here and there, because every flipping body, and no matter what color they're wearing, they all look like they're 30 or older, which is
Yeah.
unfortunate, because it would have been nice to have seen something to make people look different ages in those costumes. But clearly, uh, those outfits are very easily disposable. If you want to just go ahead and have casual sex wherever, they're very free and open and flowing. There's no pockets, nothing for possessions. The only people who have any sort of carrying equipment are the Sandmen. So
Mhm.
everything, it really denotes how everything you need is provided. There's perfect climate control inside, because you wear these silly, flimsy little frocks. Nobody's cold, nobody's hot. Everything is just perfect. And so that really, the costuming in itself tells a story where the Sandmen wear something that's far more utilitarian. And I like how even the plastic surgeon, even though it doesn't seem to be a need for it, because he's got his own automated system, you still kind of get the idea of a doctor in a way, because he's covered, from neck to toe, and even has gloves. And so you kind of feel that sort of like, the idea of a doctor there.
Right. Yeah, I agree with you. Like I said, though, it definitely has that 70s aesthetic, but I think the one that has the most gives me the most 70s vibe is there's a scene where Logan is in his apartment or whatever or his domicile, and he's wearing this black
Oh,
almost
his
gonna
sex
say
robe.
yeah, his sex robe. I was like, that's screaming 70s right there. So
Yeah,
um,
yeah, like so 70s. And it's like, I think it's kind of funny that Jenny Agutter had like this big open side on, like, so you could see everything just barely concealing. And I kind of felt like, Michael York needs a, for fairness, like have the sides of his robe open too, just held together by like a little bitty belt.
Well, not only
Now,
that,
it's not like he wasn't afraid to get naked in the film, because he does a couple of times.
yeah, they do. It's just interesting. There is a different standard. I mean, you even see it. There's a scene where they're changing because they're cold,
Yeah.
and they have Jenny just strip it all off, and she's bare. I mean, they don't show full frontal nudity, but it's darn close. But they cut it when Michael York is about to take his pants off, so we see him get So
I've heard there is a standard in the industry where, like, if you want to get a laugh, you basically show a dude naked. If you want to turn the audience on, you show a woman naked.
Yeah. Well, I know that, when I walk around naked, I always get a good laugh. So, so, all right, let's go to set design. And there's a couple things. I think the set design looks good, although it looks to me like a 70s mall with some science fiction trappings, but it doesn't look bad. The thing that's interesting to me, and I want to hear your thoughts, I definitely want to hear your thoughts on this, was all of the exterior shots, the exterior shots of the city as a whole are miniatures. And we just got off an interview earlier talking about miniatures.
Yeah.
And it's I'm not gonna say painfully obvious, glaringly obvious that they're miniatures.
Well, I'll put it this way: like, there's a lot of cool matte paintings in there when they get out into the ruins. So they basically took a lot of photographs, and they painted over them. They made all the ruins of the old world look overgrown, which was pretty cool. But again, that limits what you can do, because the characters really can't, walk. There's no parallaxing with that.
We always talk about. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
They do a couple of things with some compositing, like in the snow cave falling apart, but they try to keep a lot as practical as they could, because the compositing wasn't quite there, especially like in the ice caverns, which were kind of blue, and like they had the blue screen. They didn't have the green screen technology then.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
I thought you were
the Dome City, I was like, the Dome City didn't look good. But once you get inside the city, that looks fantastic. I love seeing like the little cars in the tubes, and that's because at the time that model that they made was the biggest scale miniature that had ever been made at the time. It was enormous. Yeah, to make all that happen. It's just huge.
See, now I liked it a lot. I thought it was really interesting. It's obvious to me it's a model, but it looks really good.
Yeah.
The one thing that takes me out of it, and it's the one thing we always talk about, how sometimes you got to use CGI for stuff.
Yeah.
The one thing you can never replicate in those models and make it look realistic is water. You can never make large bodies of water look realistic,
like
because
when they are going through the guts of the city, finding their way out, it's very evident that when they're talking about the fish breeding tanks they have, you can look at that water and that is not a gigantic volume of water. Somebody has masked out that area and composited in, like a kiddie pool or something, because the waves and the bubbles in there, your brain knows, okay, that's not to scale. That's not to scale at all.
Yep. And it was the same thing with the big giant model of the city, is that there's a point where they're going over a lake, and they put actual water in the model,
but it looks like a little puddle.
Yeah, it just looks like a little puddle. And you know what? It's a nitpicky thing, because for 1976, it's outstanding. So
yeah, I mean, like I'm like one of the things we learned about, like talking to Jason today, is the way he handled these things is in one of his behind the scenes, he would blur things. You got to have the right amount of blur to create the facility of focal depth, and that's one thing you can't do with a model unless you've really got like this tiered system of forced perspective, and you can bring up some smoke or something else to kind of haze the background a little bit. But they just clearly didn't go quite that far with it.
Now I got to ask you a question. Do you know what it is about the human eye, what it is in our brain, where we can look at fluid dynamics? So it's not just water, it's smoke, like you said, clouds, things like that. You could show me a close-up picture. You could composite a little bit of fog up into the sky and tell me it's a cloud, but I could tell it's not a cloud right away. Just the human eye could pick up on it. So what is that?
I think there's like what we actually see. We see like a reel of a reel of film. We actually see in a series of stills. That's how our brain processes things. So even though we're not aware of it, we have the illusion of motion because our brain puts all those together at a frame rate I can't even imagine. But still, there's a part of our brain that looks at it and recognizes it and knows every detail we can see. So when we see a puff of smoke for a cloud, we know that's not the right density. I think that's one of the reasons why they started making clouds is like white ink suspended in water, like a Dragon Slayer, the cloud effects they did there, which looks so good because that looks like clouds,
Yeah.
and that just had the right density to it. And so we just recognize these things. Yeah, we're uh, human beings are pattern recognizing machines, so much so that we can look at a cloud and see a critter. We can look at the moon and see a face. If there's not a pattern, we will recognize it. So we are just built. We're visual creatures, and so it's very hard to fool our eye because of that.
That kind of stuff is just fascinating to me,
Hmm.
especially when, you know, especially with the water is a big one where it's like you could try and tell me that this is a lake or something, but every person can look at it and automatically say, that's just wrong. It's just wrong. It's
And
it's
that's where
very
I have to
strange.
give it to modern CGI. When you look at how water has progressed since films like Titanic, uh, how the hair rendering has gone from American Werewolf in Paris to where you look at King Kong now or Caesar from the New Planet of the Apes, where things that used to be impossible to trick the eye just look bloody flawless if you've
Yeah.
got enough time and money to spend on it.
Yeah, it's a hair is another great example you bring up because even though we may not consciously register all of this information, it's
Hmm.
like our brain is seeing every single hair follicle and all of that on there. And if any of it's wrong, we just know instinctively that something
Well,
about what we're
here's
seeing is
here's how
wrong.
crazy our brain is. Like we have this whole life experience, and doctors found out accidentally doing brain surgery on people that if they stimulated parts of the brain, a person would remember something that was long forgotten. So even though we forget, it's like your hard drive. All of that information is still stored in there.
That's
So when you
incredible.
when you look at something, it still comes into play.
See, and there is a technology I think will happen sooner rather than later, which is what will happen, especially it'll start probably with court cases where they will hook you up to a device and instead of eyewitness testimony, they're just going to replay what has been recorded in your brain,
That would
for what
actually
you
be
really
better because human memory is actually quite faulty because we are also quite easily suggestible.
yeah,
If you make an inference to something, uh, you start remembering things wrong.
yeah. I think that'll eventually happen. It's just, that's a whole science fiction story unto itself because
Mm.
then you're going to start to have other problems. You're going to have the Johnny
Minority
Mnemonic.
Report 2.
Yeah, or Johnny Mnemonic, where people are going to start implanting stuff in there,
Yep.
or things like that. So,
That's why I would never get wetware. I don't want anybody giving me the false memories.
absolutely. All right, so let's hit the ending of the film now,
Yes.
and so Steve wanted to talk about this, and I think there's two different things we have to talk about. Um, One is they go back to the city, and we're gonna hit that one first, and we need to talk about does that make sense? And a bunch of other stuff. The second part is um there's an interrogation scene and the computer ends up blowing up because of the interrogation scene or it breaks down. And so I think those are two aspects, and Steve pointed those out, and I think he's right to point them out. So I wanted to bring them up. So let's hit the first one first. The decision for Logan and Ginny Six to go back to the city and bring the old man with them. Now, bringing the old man with them makes perfect sense to me if
Yeah.
they're going to go back. But going back to the city, what do you think about that as far as the ending of in the ending of the film, within the film context of film itself, and as a decision?
I saw this movie long before I discovered the book series, and the part when they get to the old man, it drags on for a bit. He's sadly kind of useless. He's apparently been living on his own his whole life.
Yeah.
He's deep in dementia. He can't even remember his own name, and he kind of sort of alludes that other people have made it to the outside before. That it wasn't just his mom and dad at one point, but clearly he's been alone for a long time. So we don't know what happened to any of the other people out there. And frankly, that's a story I wanted to explore. So I was a little bit disappointed by that. And he's only barely functional in that sense. So I was kind of happy when Francis showed up to start moving the plot along again.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Peter Ustinov did a great job. He had just the right amount of exposition and befuddledness to him.
Do you think it's fair to say that, similar to a TV show that we're doing on Sloppy Spoilers, that that whole section of the movie feels like a almost separate movie unto itself? Like they couldn't decide what they wanted the movie to be, and they added on this whole subsection?
I tell you, man, because you could have ended this like THX 1138 when they jump outside and they see the sun. I was struck by that right away.
And it's over. Boom, yeah. Done.
They made it. They're free. They discover the life clocks aren't working. We'll figure out if we can. You leave it up to the audience whether or not they have the skills to make it, or if they can figure out how to make it outside, and if they find other people.
Correct me if I'm wrong. I think the problem is, but I'm sure they had some deleted footage they could have put in here. I think that occurs right around the hour and 20-minute mark, which is very short for a film at that point in time.
Well, hour 20 minutes, that's, our average movie is about 90 minutes. So that's a decent film. But then again, this was also a period of time where we were getting some longer form films.
Yeah.
2001, The Bible, these big epic films. Star Wars, which would come out. Star Wars, which would come out a little while later. All three of the first Star Wars films ran over 2 hours.
Yeah.
So people were used to a longer film back then.
I think 2 hours was kind of the standard, and this one comes in right at 1 hour 53 minutes, something like that. So,
it really did seem to meander, and for me, the ending, given the sanctuary that we get, which is really no sanctuary. You're free, but if you don't find the old man, do you figure out how to survive? I don't think so. Maybe Logan, but all of Logan's training has been in an urban environment. He doesn't know how to cook food and skin animals and do all that.
I will go out on a limb and say Logan is dead as well. They don't know how to survive in a wilderness environment and to keep themselves warm and find shelter and build shelter and any number of things,
Yeah, you don't see them making a fire until they get to the old man.
Yeah.
So going back to the city makes perfect sense. Bringing him back makes perfect sense. This is where all the resources are. But they should really have been, at the very least, Jenny should have been, or Jessica should have been killed right away. There's no reason to keep her alive.
But Logan says that the reason they got to go back in the city is because they got to free all the people. Now, does that make sense to you?
I think if you want to, I think Logan at this point wants sanctuary because they're outside the system. So they need more people to join their community. It's a survival thing. And he, as a Sandman, he's kind of got this, as somebody who has taken life, he's kind of got a built-in survival mechanism, I think.
I look at it, I agree with you. I look at it in a little bit different perspective in that I think as a guy who was part of the system, who devoted his entire life to the system, took lives in the name of the system and believed in it, when he realized that the whole system is founded on a lie, and then now he has found something better, found something where people don't have to die, I think that the only way for him to survive and live with himself is to go back and try and free.
Yeah, there's that, and humans require community to survive. We are social creatures for a reason. And the wonderful moment where he's in the chair and the computer's telling him his mission, and the computer won't say it, but it says it. It's like, how, this many people are missing? Like, surely some of them renewed.
Mm-hmm.
Did anyone renew? And the computer's like, the question has been answered.
Yep.
And he's like freaked out. His whole paradigm is shifted. I don't know, like, fortunately, because Francis would not have asked the question. But if Francis had asked such a question, I think Francis would have self-destructed.
Francis, he would have killed himself.
Yeah,
I don't think he could live.
He would have been like the operative in Firefly. where like Mal survived the destruction of his world, but the operative is not.
Yep.
He's definitely not. Joss Whedon has even said so. So they need that. They need to say this is where all the resources are. But when I look at the film, I just kind of know that everybody's doomed. I didn't see anything like a library. I hope the old man can teach folks how to survive, because that is their only hope. Clearly, the mechanisms of this future world are going to break down. Logan keeps going like, oh, we've got this hydrothermal power. Doesn't look like anybody's maintained it in a long time. It's all going to break down sooner or later.
It's all done. The computer's been keeping them alive.
Yeah.
Although I got the impression that the old man is going to be incredibly popular socially and sexually, because everybody seems to be fascinated with him.
Well, like in a hedonistic society, this is a new thing.
Yeah, exactly. But you brought up the second thing that I wanted to talk about, and I have some definite thoughts on this. So I'm going to throw my stuff out there, and I want to hear your thoughts on it, which was the computer is interrogating Logan about Sanctuary, and eventually the computer just busts. It yeets itself, or it gets yeeted, and it's the only thing, like you said, running the whole society, so that once it goes up, I don't think that everything would have started blowing up that fast, but we only have so much time in the movie.
Yeah.
So, everything's got to blow up.
Things.
Yeah. But, Steve didn't get that one. And I would say to Steve that basically what has happened is that the computer has been confronted with a logical paradox here.
Yeah.
Which is it believes Sanctuary existed. It knows that so many people escaped, and yet Logan is telling them that there is no Sanctuary. Now, you would wonder why the computer can't come to the conclusion that somebody is lying at this point, and so it could resolve the fallacy, the paradox that way. But for whatever reason, it doesn't, and so it just goes crazy.
Because Logan can't lie, because it is it's mind raping him. It's created these digital copies of him, so it's speaking from its all these digital copies are speaking from his direct memories, his own impressions and experiences. And so the computer, which, if you think of Francis as an extension of the computer, he is its weapon arm. The computer is an extension of Francis's ideology.
Love that idea. I love that idea.
So the two of them are so intertwined. And when I talked about Francis would, implode if he was faced with the truth, this is what happens to the computer when it's faced with abject, undeniable truth, because Logan obviously doesn't have any superior mind skills or willpower. He can't resist. You see it makes one facsimile, then another, then another, then another, trying to get it to say something different, trying to probe his mind for like something that'll let it process this. But it can't deny the face of the evidence. So it hits a paradox, like you say. And it's like seeing these classic moments in Star Trek when the unit that was put on the Enterprise to make it the ultimate battleship cracks up when it's confronted with like a murder, or when Spock, just mind twist the two Robo girls on Mudd's planet. Computers, they have problems when they're faced with something they cannot ignore.
And what's ironic is that the whole fault in the logic is because of a robot Box, who froze all of the people who escaped to go to Sanctuary. If he hadn't done that,
is an interesting character, because Box, by his words, is a cyborg, which is part of the reason he looks. I find him to be kind of eerie, but also like janky. Like you said, it's not the best costume job. I did like the mirror finish that reflected a lot of things that were going on in Logan. And that's the whole creepy little subtext right there, that he had been. That's the only hope of the people, really. If they can get back in there and get it all the frozen food, all the fish and the sea protein and all the greens and all that. But the fact that apparently no runners ever made it out because Box just put them in the deep freeze.
Yeah, for food, no less.
Which is so funny, because in the book, he was the warden of a prison.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh wow. Yeah.
If you couldn't fit into society and it wasn't time to exterminate you, they literally put you on ice.
It really is a whole creepy, twisted
Yes.
subtext to the movie as well. It's like,
You know,
oh
he
God,
even calls the runners the new food.
yeah. I'm like, oh man, like Jesus.
Soylent Green indeed.
Yeah, I was like, oh, it's like you're like, yeah, yeah, it is really creepy when you realize exactly what has happened to these people, and it's like, and it actually shows them frozen in there as
Yeah.
well too. So you're like, oh,
Really a really horrific scene.
yeah,
And it's great because it's in such a sanitized sort of place, you know, like everything's white and icy, and you know, you think kind of pure and clean, and there are all these dead frozen people in the walls.
I mean, it really is disturbing, and then I like your idea that France is an extension, or that the two of them are extensions of each other, and so that and then that whole irony there, it's pretty good. That's pretty good. So, all right, so that is Logan's Game. We'll go to some final thoughts real quick. I will say to everybody out there, go check this film out. It's one of those science fiction films. It's another one of those foundational science fiction films.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of stuff was built on it. There's a lot of stuff that was derivative of it that changed different things, different aspects, but was really good. Like we talked about, In Time is one. Another one, MTV came out with a great science fiction animation series that I think
Aeon Flux.
Aeon Flux, yep.
Yes,
So
very, very much inspired by this, I would say.
yeah, so go check that out as well. There's a lot of really great science fiction that has come out of this. And Aeon Flux borrowed not only from this film, but the look of heavy metal, and created Aeon Flux. So incredible, incredible series. Go check that out. So final thoughts on the movie, and you are picking the next science fiction movie. So you're going to announce that if you're ready to announce that. So.
Oh, geez, so many good ones. I would love to talk about Slipstream with Mark Hamill. I think that's a film not too many people have seen.
Well,
but given Lance's reaction, getting into some Philip K. Dick with Screamers would also be a pretty excellent choice. Or if you just want to get into something that's weird and fun, Saturn V.
Screamer sounds like a good one to me, or Slipstream. Either one is good for me. So, which would you rather do, Screamers or Slipstream? I always like Philip K. Dick. I'd love to get into that.
Okay, let's do Screamers then, because you want it, Lance wants it. We'll get into Slipstream some other time.
All right, let's do Screamers. So, you heard it all here, Screamers. Final thoughts on Logan's Run, though, before we go.
Like you said, this is a project of its time. It was impactful enough to spawn a 14-episode TV series. But unfortunately, like most TV series, it just didn't have quite the same kind of feeling or flavor to it. They obviously couldn't take it as far. There's no orgy room in this movie, or in the TV series. You had those restrictions, and it was kind of fun to follow up. And Marvel Comics even did a series of comic books based on it.
I read about that.
Some of the art done by George Perez, and I have one signed by Al Milgrom because he did some inking inside of it.
Crazy. I didn't know that. I'd love to see that sometime. So
yeah, I got it signed back in 2018, so that was really cool. Catching Al at a con. Cool.
Awesome.
But yeah, it is one of those foundational science fiction movies. It's one of those pillars that kind of hold things up, because there's, as we've said, there's like 90% of stuff is silly, hokey, trashy, subpar. Yeah. But this is one of those films that has stood the test of time, even with it being a product of its time. So I hope people can look at these older movies in the spirit of where they came from and not get all bent out of shape. And like Jason told us on our own interviews, like it's a movie, guys. Don't get twisted about it. Just sit back and enjoy it for what it is. Yeah. And that's what you should do with this, because there is a lot of stuff that's kind of interesting and even relevant to today if you look at it.
And I would say not only all of that, but if you're watching a movie and you have problems with some stuff in it, and you probably you might, I mean, there's a lot of older things that you're going to watch, you're going to have problems with it. Take the stuff you like. Take the stuff you like and leave the rest. You're allowed to do that. In fact,
we do that all the time.
Yep.
And that's with like current stuff. That's one thing that never goes away. There's nothing that's 100% perfect.
Yep. So There are, I will say, eventually I would like to get back to this actor again, but I love old Bob Hope movies from the 1930s. But it's a fact of life that one of the things you are going to find in movies from the 30s and 40s is a lot of racism, and you got to take that with the good with the bad and throw away the bad, or at least acknowledge it and put it to its place and contextualize
The
it.
literature too. I'm a big fan of Lovecraft, Edgar Rice Burroughs, Robert E. Howard, but they were not too kind to people who did not look like them.
Yes. So, and so you can still enjoy the stuff, but, understand that that's there and contextualize it, put it to the side and enjoy what's there, because you'll get a lot of enjoyment and entertainment out of it. And if you're a creative, it's going to help you inspire you to do your own work as well, and that is another big thing. So,
Yeah. Don't limit yourself to just what's going on today. Look deeper, dig deeper. And not even just like this media here. Dig deep into classic literature stories. Read the Iliad and the Odyssey. Look at the works of Shakespeare. Look at the fiction from China, Japan, Russia. Get into the mythology of the Norse period or the Celts. There's a whole rich world out there that will fuel your creativities in ways that you can't even imagine yet.
Yeah, and one of the reasons we're bringing all this to you guys is, to all you out there watching this, is that we love these movies. We think that they're important. They're important to contextualize and to understand where everything came from, and I think they're worth revisiting. But also, if you're sitting there watching this going, I could tell this story but better, or I could tell the story and change it up and do something. Do it. Do it. Get out there and tell your story. Tell it, in whatever medium you want to do it, but get out there and do it. Grab the bull by the horns and tell that story, because if you don't make it, no one's going to make it. So, yeah, get out there and do it. So,
take a chance. Like, one of my favorite films is Mel Gibson's Apocalypto, and it's absolutely breathtaking.
Oh, absolutely great movie. In fact, we're going to have to cover that movie at some point because I think that's fantastic. But until next time, on behalf of Cinema Crusaders, Undercover Case Podcast Network, and Comic Crusaders, I'm Boom, and that's
Stick.
I'm Wiz, and that's Boomstick, or otherwise known as Nim, and I'm Bracy, and we
How'd you get to be Bracy?
I'm Nim, you're Bracy.
There you go.
And that is the viewing audience out there. But this is Cinema Crusaders. We're out of here. Everybody enjoy the weekend. Bye.